General Doug Gansler took office in 2006, and he focused on environmental, consumer, and public safety issues. He's distinguished himself by prosecuting polluters of the Chesapeake Bay, protecting consumers from various forms of fraud, and safeguarding the public from gangs, violent crime, and the underbelly of the internet. Attorney General Gansler recently ended his tenure as the president of the National Association of Attorney Generals, and he served as the chair of the Democratic Attorney Generals Association. He has also chaired the National Association of Attorney Generals Committee on Youth Access to Alcohol, the Environment, and the Energy. We look forward to hearing your presentation, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. I appreciate you doing this. It's anytime we could talk about how we need more business in Maryland, it's a good thing, and depending on, even including the subsector of manufacturing, because up until the 1960s, 35% of our jobs in Maryland were in manufacturing, and now it's about 5%. Maryland, unfortunately, it ranks 43rd in the country when it comes to manufacturing jobs, and behind all the other mid-Atlantic states, and you just heard a report card about that, and it seems to me that manufacturing shouldn't just be part of our past, but it should be part of our future. I think that the anti-business climate that we have both in the reality and the perception in Maryland has to start at the top if we're going to change it. And we need to make sure that we welcome business. We understand that business is that we're losing jobs exponentially here. They're fleeing our state. I live in Bethesda, so I see the most of it where they leave from Montgomery County and go to Virginia. Virginia is looking to put $1 billion into a rainy day fund right now, while we're looking at billion-dollar deficits each year when we go to Annapolis. Obviously, one of the candidates isn't here today because of that attitude that we have in Maryland, including the fact that we've raised 40 consecutive taxes over the last 7 or 8 years, which is one of the main reasons why most of the companies leave Maryland, including the additional 32 fees that have been put on top of that. And so when you look at what's going on with the business climate in Maryland, it's obviously unsustainable. We can't last forever. We're seeing the dependency that we have right now on federal jobs as the government's closed down, and we're going to see that affect us into the years to come. One of the things that we should be talking about, obviously, is manufacturing. And if you go to Western Maryland in particular, but the Eastern Shore and Southern Maryland, even Baltimore, you see the vacant manufacturing concerns that have left our state for neighboring states. And that's, like I said, it starts at the top, and DBED and the unwillingness to actually go out and recruit companies from other states and to retain the companies that are here. We have the greatest state in the country. I actually am the only candidate that grew up in Maryland in the Democratic side of this field, and so I understand it and appreciate the state that we have and where we can be and where we were. And so when you think about that, there's a number of things we need to do, and I've talked about a few of them during the course of our ideas rollout during the campaign. As a matter of fact, we had we started a while back talking about different ideas and things we want to do into the future. We talked about domestic violence. We talked about transparency in government. But one of the things we did was talked about manufacturing, how we need to bring manufacturing jobs back to Maryland. We went out to Western Maryland, where they've lost so many of their companies. They still have the Mack Volvo plant, but that's about it, and all the rest have pretty much gone. But one of the things we talked about, and of course the Washington Post editorialized on it in the Metro section, but it was actually a Metro section article because it talked about dropping the corporate tax from 8.25% to 6%. Virginia has a 6%, and we have 8.25%. So if you just, common sense would suggest if two products are more or less the same, and they're on the shelf, and one's $8.25 and one's $6, then everyone's going to keep coming in and buying the $6 product and leave the $8.25 product on the shelf. And that's what's happening to us in Maryland as the companies continue to go to Virginia. We need to look at our personal and corporate tax structure. We haven't done so in 20, 25 years. We need to make it competitive with our neighboring states. We need to raise our inheritance exemption from the $1 million to match the federal number of $5 million. Obviously, we can't do what Virginia does, which is not have an inheritance tax, but because of the composition of our state. But we can raise it so everyone, when they retire retire, they don't flee our state. We need to focus on, not as much on the manufacturing side, but we need to focus on our particular strengths, our unique strengths, which are life sciences and cybersecurity. We're the only state in the country that has the #1 hospital in the world for the last 21 out of 22 years. It's our biggest employer outside of the state government, and that's Johns Hopkins. We're the only state in the country with the National Institutes of Health. And we need to obviously promote our life sciences industry as they have done in Cambridge and Palo Alto. Why? Because of Harvard and Stanford. Well, in the medical field and the science field, neither of them can hold a candle to Hopkins. And cybersecurity. We're the only state in the country that has the NSA and the Cyber Command Center. So we need to promote those two industries as well. But in manufacturing, there's so much that we can do. And, getting a D, I got into Yale for lacrosse, but I didn't get a lot of Ds. And I know that Ds aren't very good. And so we need to fix that on so many different levels. And we're really uniquely situated here in Maryland to have manufacturing. We have the Chesapeake Bay. We have the Port of Baltimore. We have BWI, which is one of our bigger airports in the country now. It's just past Dulles. We have rail going out to the west from here, and we have a very robust highway system. So there's really no reason other than our sort of not welcoming business and the tax structure, as well as some of the other issues that have been brought forth for why we don't have manufacturing. So let me talk. I was asked to talk about a few specific proposals. I will do that. One of them is to have a Buy Maryland, where we have Maryland preferred procurements and grants, where we revise the procurement and grant policies for all state agencies to give preferences to goods and services manufactured or provided by Maryland businesses if they are competitively priced and of comparable quality. We actually need to revamp our entire procurement process. We have about $18 billion that is in terms of procurement contracts in Maryland each year. There's very little transparency and even less competition. But Buy Maryland would be one of them. We should create industrial business zones. We should use existing manufacturing footprints, identify the industrial business zones across the state to facilitate the growth of Maryland's manufacturing hubs. Given the space requirements for industrial operations, land zone for manufacturing, businesses under this program would be preserved for this purpose and not be rezoned for commercial or residential development. Within each zone, Maryland would subsidize the workforce training programs for manufacturing-related jobs, provide tax credits for manufacturing companies that move into vacant commercial or industrial property, and award manufacturing assistance grants for capital projects that improve production efficiency, competitiveness of Maryland exports. Third, Maryland life cycle manufacturing credits. We got, of our best grades, we got a B on innovation, and that's one of our strengths and our weaknesses. So we're actually the #1 state in the country in terms of research dollars that come into Maryland, yet we're 39th in tech transfer. So we have the incredible innovation in terms of the ideas that are conceived in Maryland, but they're not built or produced in Maryland. They're produced and built elsewhere. So we should have a Maryland Life Cycle Manufacturing Credit, which supports Maryland's business benefiting from the current research and development tax credit by extending them a tax credit for the manufacturing those products here in Maryland. And this additional manufacturing tax incentive rewards innovators by lowering their cost of producing products as they transition from research to production, and ensures that Maryland reaps the economic and job creation benefits of the research that's done here. These incentives allow our entrepreneurs to reinvest in new ideas and new technology. They ensure the economic and job benefit of the research incentives that they remain in Maryland, and that Maryland retains top talent whose ingenuity can fuel job growth for years to come. We have the smartest people in the country here in Maryland. That was sort of part of that, which is in the sense that we have the most advanced degrees in Maryland. So we have the ability to do this. We just need the willpower. Green and renewable energy tax credit, which provides tax increment financing or tax abatements for Maryland businesses renovating vacant industrial buildings to manufacture renewable energy systems. The renovations must primarily support the production of components or sub-assembly parts for qualified biomass, hydropower, solar, or wind-based electricity generating plants, and to ensure that the tax benefits only accrue while the spaces are used to develop Maryland renewable energy capacity, the state will negotiate long-term restrictive covenants that prevent neglect or misuse. I personally have been very involved for about 3 or 4 years in trying to get a power plant to come to convert chicken manure into energy here in Maryland, and we finally got an RFP to do that. And the last one I'll talk about, since I've got my warning up there, is Maryland Small Business Manufacturing Initiative, which is to establish a competitive pilot program to prepare 12 small and medium-sized companies to manufacture their goods in Maryland for export within 12 months. This fast-tracked exporting program will provide each small business enterprise with a $25,000 grant and export assistance from the Department of Business and Economic Development to refine their business plans in order to target overseas markets. And since she hasn't jumped up, I'll give you one other thing I'd like to do as part of DBED. It was separate, is to create a governor's business council, which will have 15 or 20 CEOs here in Maryland, that when a company wants to come here, will actually go out, the CEOs will, to the company and talk to them about the wonderful things that we have here in Maryland and how they can start their business and flourish here in Maryland. So with that, I think my 10 minutes are up and I'll subside.
You're right on time.
Thanks for noticing. I'm a fiscal and time conservative, so thanks for.
Thank you, Attorney General Gansler. We now are going to go to the section where we ask you questions. I have 2 questions. In the Washington Post article of August 29th, there was a discussion about how Governor O'Malley raised our corporate income taxes from 7% to 8.25%, which is higher than Virginia, which is at 6%, higher than West Virginia, which is 7.25%, making us less competitive. You proposed to cut corporate income taxes down to 6%, which is, I think, a wonderful thing to help make companies flourish in our state. However, 80% of American manufacturers are organized as an LLC or subchapter S, like Marlin, where we pay on the personal level, consolidated. What is your vision for a rational income tax rate for factory owners, manufacturers, because most of us are organized that way? My second question, I'll ask 2 questions, is between 2001 and 2010, Maryland lost 33% of its manufacturing jobs. There are many reasons for that. Dr. Hicks discussed several of them. One of them is because of IT theft and software. They're being stolen by overseas competitors. And there was a recent study that said that 10% of Maryland jobs were lost because of this IT and software theft by Chinese, Asian companies, probably 740 jobs in the Maryland state. Do you see this as a problem, and what do you think we should do about it? Those are my 2 questions.
Okay, the first question, I've already sort of alluded to the corporate tax, and the Washington Post stories are, you got to sort of take all those with a grain of salt during this campaign until they get more level. But the corporate tax was actually accurate. The other thing you should mention, by the way, is West Virginia's is 7.2. I believe it's going down to 6.5, I think by the end of this year or next year. So that's going to make us even less competitive for Western Maryland competition as well. So I already mentioned that, I actually was and am the first statewide elected to come out for increasing the minimum wage as well to $10 an hour, which I know some of the business community doesn't like, but I do think that that's essential. It's going to happen. And right now, if you're making $7.25 an hour, and you're working a 40-hour week, you're still below the federal poverty line. So I think that we need to raise that to 10, but at the same time, reduce our corporate income tax to the 6%, which will make us competitive with our neighboring states. And as I mentioned already, the reason why that's important. In terms of the personal income tax structure, that's also, we're losing enormous amounts of people. I think that same publication, the Post, I think, or might have been the Sun, talked about how we've lost $5.5 billion in people just leaving. And everybody in here is in the business community in Maryland either knows somebody or that's left or is contemplating leaving the state because of the tax structure. So our taxes and that's why I said we have to look at both the personal and the corporate tax and restructure the whole thing to make us competitive with our neighboring states, so people don't feel like we're penalizing wealth and we are anti-business. I mean, we have 3 Fortune 500 companies left in Maryland. We have the highest per capita income in the country. It just makes no sense. Baltimore, along with Buffalo, are the only NFL cities in America that don't have Fortune 500 companies anymore. So I think that's a tragedy. In terms of the IT theft, I appreciate the question because, as you mentioned in the introduction, I just came off in June of being the president of the National Association of Attorneys General, NAG, stands for National Association of Aspiring Governors. And my presidential initiative for the year was privacy in the digital age. And we talked about a number of issues, talking about what happens when you buy products on the internet, who's following you around, and that kind of thing. But one of the things we talked about, and we did specifically actually brought cases on, was this idea of IT theft, because that's privacy for companies. And there are international companies, particularly China being the biggest culprit, that takes our ideas, our software, and does knockoffs basically of them. And we've been able to go after a lot of them that are here, and we obviously need more international laws because of with the ability to go after, because the long arm of the law doesn't actually extend there. But that's a huge issue, IT theft, and it's something I've been working on for a long time, and we need to continue to work on.
Pardon me. Attorney General Gansler, you'd mentioned early on that one of the things you wanted to do is have DBED go to other states and essentially try to bring some of the jobs and work back into Maryland. How would that be focused? I mean, given the scorecard that we have, how would we wind up structuring that so that we're able to go out and try to convince other manufacturers to come to Maryland?
Right, I think we have to look at DBED. First of all, this is what happens in politics. I didn't say that we should have DBED go out there. I actually think we should not have DBED go out there, because I think, as all of you who have worked with DBED recently, you see how that works. So I think what I was talking about doing instead was having a governor's business council with actual business people that don't talk about business but have actually been in the business world, CEOs of companies, without calling out people. You can imagine Alan Wilson, you can imagine, Brian Rogers, Kevin Plank, people of that like that, and then smaller companies, biotech companies, life sciences, cybersecurity, and have them be on the council. And then when a company is looking to come to Maryland, those folks would go out there and talk about, the schools we have, the transportation, all the wonderful things that we do have in Maryland to attract them to come here and be able to provide incentives to them to come here, like Virginia does. I mean, we basically say when a company, and I've had the experience, I've had, people I know that have owned companies and wanted to move to Maryland, and I put them in touch with DBED, and the response is, oh, we're open for business. That's the end of the conversation. And then they talk to someone from Virginia, they say, well, we're open for business, and here's what we'd like to do. I've actually met with CEOs that have decided to go to Virginia instead of Maryland, not the ones that came here, but the ones that went there, and talked about the differences in the packages that were offered, and they're night and day. And so we have to actually have to understand that business is a good thing. Look, I'm a Democrat. And I understand we're a one-party state and all that, so the Democrats can end up winning the deal at the end. And we can have a choice of a pro-business Democrat or continuation of what we have now. And so, except for Mr. Lawler, the Republicans are going to win this time. This is your year. But so we have that choice. And the reason why I bring up the Democratic piece is because we do, as Democrats, want to have, we care about the fact that we have the #2 minority achievement gap in the country. We care about the fact that we have almost a 50% recidivism rate, so we're paying for all these people to be in jail and all that. So we need to we need to bring businesses here to increase our tax base, so we have more people paying into the system, so then we can actually do the social programs that we care about as Democrats.
With the federal government addressing its deficit, we hope in the future, thank you. It ends up that Maryland is particularly vulnerable. And so with that, as these potential tax revenues go away, right, how do you see addressing both, reducing taxes and potentially accelerating manufacturing at the same time? What would be, if we were in an environment where 10-15% of our tax base went away because the federal government said, we're decreasing this business today, what would you do to fast-track manufacturing?
Well, I think there's two things. One is I hope the federal government doesn't do that, but we also actually should attract more federal installations to Maryland, the FBI being the most obvious and most current, which actually would help our economy as well, and we could sort of talk about all the great things we have in Maryland that would promote that. The other issue we have right now, in my view, is that we're really mortgaging our economic future and vitality on the backs of gambling alone, right now. So we've sort of put all this gambling in there, and we're getting poor people to go to casinos and put quarters in machines, and then we're hoping that that's going to solve all our problems, as opposed to bringing life sciences, bringing cybersecurity, bringing manufacturing back. So, I mean, I think there's a very myopic view of government right now. For example, when I came out with saying we should reduce the corporate tax rate 1/4 to 6%, one of my opponents said, well, that's going to cost $300 million a year. Just, they make up numbers, but they make up polls, they do all kinds of stuff. But that was sort of what they said, $300 million a year, without recognizing that if you take the delta from one year, last year, for the percentage, that might be the case. But when you reduce the corporate tax and companies come here, you're actually going to bring in a lot more money, and it's not sort of what's that going to cost, it's how much is that going to make. Same with manufacturing. If we bring right now, if you look at Kelly Tires and all the different manufacturing companies that have left Western Maryland, and there's a big footprint just sitting there vacant. So, and I'm the biggest environmentalist there is, but when you already have a vacant plant sitting there that they're not cutting down any trees, you can say to a company, you tell us what it will take for you to come here and manufacture your sneakers for your company or whatever it might be, and give a huge incentive to that manufacturing. Because right now we're getting nothing out of that plant. And if they're going to employ 250, 300 people to make sneakers, you just got 250, 300 new people paying taxes into the system, and we're making more money. So I think we need to balance, to the principle underscoring your question, I think we need to balance our economy. We need to diversify our economy here in Maryland and not be dependent on federal jobs and gambling alone.
One more follow-up. There are industry, very fast. There are industries that are clusters, states that are now regionalizing in terms of how they're looking at things more strategically. One area is areas such as the Ohio corridor, which is looking at things such as additive manufacturing. If you were to look at manufacturing in Maryland, what kind of manufacturing could you look at becoming a cluster here and being more strategic in nature?
Well, the only thing that jumps to mind in terms of manufacturing is sort of making up the life sciences component from NIH up 270, where we already have a structure with Digene, Human Genome Sciences, MedImmune, that kind of thing, going up to Frederick and coming across, because there's so many of these patents and so many of the ideas are conceived here that makes sense on a regional level to do that. I mean, we made a conscious decision in Maryland to go biotech, where they went for regular technology, cyber technology, and others in Virginia at the same time. And we could actually have more of a regional approach to combining those two. But I do think the sector that makes the most sense is life sciences as well as cybersecurity, but up 270 to Frederick and across to Hopkins, and University of Maryland Medical System could be part of that analysis as well.
Thank you, Attorney General Gansler. We appreciate you coming on out today.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you for
it.
your ideas.